Discuss the latest developments in Ukraine with Pentagon senior strategist, retired Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis. He joins us now from Woodbridge in the U.S. state of Virginia. So it's always a pleasure seeing you. So we heard today that Russia says it's test-fired a Sarmat Intercontinental missile, which President Putin says can overcome, quote, all modern means of anti-missile defense, can carry 12 nuclear warheads and reach anywhere on the planet. What more can you tell us about this weapon?
Well, the Russians, the U.S., other nations announce when they're going to do test fires, so this was not a surprise to the Pentagon. The capability of the missile has to be validated by the intelligence personnel. They'll look at the telemetry, they'll look at all the signals, and they'll come through their own conclusions about whether or not it's as capable as Mr. Putin alleges. What's important to understand is that over the last 20 years, the Russians have continued to improve their ballistic missile capability. Meanwhile, over the last decade, the U.S. is taking sort of a improvement holiday and hasn't. And it's about time with the new budget that's coming out from President Biden that we begin to do that process. So there is a global competition amongst nations that have nuclear-capable long-range ballistic missiles.
Lieutenant Colonel, do you think Russia plans on using Sarmat missiles in the Ukraine conflict, or do you think this test launch is just likely a show of strength?
Well, we've seen a couple of things. Before the war began earlier in February, Mr. Putin was in the Black Sea and he observed a nuclear demonstration. Then, of course, we saw the hypersonic missile fired from inside Russia that hit in Lviv. So, it's quite possible that the Russians are just posturing here, sending messages that they are capable. There's no question that the Russians have somewhere north of 6,300 nuclear weapons. They have bombers, they have ballistic missiles, they have submarine-launched ballistic missiles. So, based on new strategic talks and the like, we know what the other side has. And so it is somewhat boasting, but it's also just the reality when you deal with nations that have large inventories of deadly weapons that they have to remind one another. Now, of course, the U.S., the Brits, certainly the French, others have weapons as well. So I don't know that they're going to use these weapons, but we have to watch and we have to be very cautious.
Meanwhile, the U.S. on Wednesday unveiled its latest round of sanctions, which in part target a key commercial bank and a Russian oligarch. But earlier this month, we saw President Putin's moves to prop up the ruble led to its rebound. What is Washington's train of thought when it comes to these sanctions? I mean, they seem to have no impact at all.
Yeah, I'm disappointed to say the least, and I think most people are. The so-called severe sanctions are not having the hoped for, certainly the implied effect. What's happened is that Mr. Putin went to war, had all his tanks and all his equipment, had all his people, they were all trained, so he didn't have to make continuous investments. Now, in Donbass, we find that he has less experienced personnel that came up from the reserves. We find that they've taken some of their equipment out of storage, out of mothballs, and it's not nearly as good as some of that was destroyed north of Kyiv. But also we have to recognize that Mr. Putin can take resources like fuel, if he wants, free of charge from state-owned energy companies in Russia. And so he can probably continue to pay for this war for some time. And in fact, this month, April 2022, Mr. Putin is scheduled to make an additional $10 billion profit from his energy sales. So if you want to hurt Mr. Putin, you have to somehow cut off the money supply that he's getting from sales of his energy.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Pentagon strategist, retired Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis, again, thank you for your time.